Good evening. A reading from Luke. Jesus came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will but yours be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray, that you may not come into the time of trial." Even when God is silent. I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love even when feeling it not. I believe in God even when God is silent.
A reading from Matthew. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly, one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen this way?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled.
I served an unapproachable God. While I served the high priest that served an unapproachable God. But everything changed in that one night. Everything changed in one night. I was drugged to the garden, and then my ear... I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I was there in the garden with Judas. Judas knew exactly where Jesus was going to be, and we were all there waiting for him. It was crazy that night. His disciples were with him, but I saw Jesus. I was very close to Jesus, and you could tell he was visibly upset. And Judas kisses Jesus on the cheek, and I was standing so close that I heard Jesus call Judas friend. And that's the last thing I heard, because moments later I heard nothing. I saw the flash of a blade come toward my face, and I felt blood streaming down, and then it got quiet. And then I got dizzy, and then Jesus, he touched me. Like I said, I heard all the stories about Jesus, and I've heard all the stories about how Jesus healed people with his hands. There was this one time he healed a person with dirt and spit. And so many people, he just healed them with his hands, but it wasn't his hands for me. It was the way he looked at me. It was his eyes. That's what broke me. His eyes were filled with compassion and grief and joy. And when he pulled his hand away, my ear, that night, everything I heard about that man had changed forever. They had a mock trial for him. The whole night was just set up to condemn him. And he didn't say a word. He just felt sorry for us. There was the sentencing, there was Pilate, the crucifixion, and then there was an earthquake. And then the veil. I was in the temple. When the veil was ripped in half. Do you know what that means? Even I knew what that meant. God had invited us all in. The unapproachable God was now approachable. God was on the move.
A reading from Matthew. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, two came forward and said, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days.'" The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do you still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?"
A reading from John. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him."
A reading from Mark. Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? For he realized that it was out of jealousy the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews? They shouted back, Crucify him. Pilate asked them, Why? What evil has he done? But they all shouted the more, Crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
Pontius Pilate by Frederick Buechner. As the Roman governor, Pilate had the last word. He could have saved Jesus if he wanted to, and all the indications are that for various reasons, that's what he'd like to have done. In the first place, after personally interrogating him, he decided that no wrong had been done and said so. I find no crime in this man, he told the chief priests. Maybe Pilate had committed some religious faux pas in their eyes, but the religion of the Jews was nothing to him, and he couldn't have cared less. In fact, as a sophisticated Roman, religion was not his cup of tea, and he'd been quite frank about it to Jesus himself during their one-on-one interview. When Jesus told him he'd come to bear witness to the truth, Pilate's reply was, What is truth? Truth was for people who had time to worry about truth. Pilate was a busy man. In the second place, on the basis of a troubling dream she'd had, Pilate's wife begged him to have nothing to do with that righteous man. That gave him pause. In the third place, his primary responsibility as a colonial administrator was to keep peace in the colonies at any price. And the last thing he wanted to do was to stir up a hornet's nest by making a martyr out of some local hero. Nevertheless, when it became clear that he would stir up an even nastier hornet's nest by setting Jesus free, and when, in addition to that, the enemies of Jesus pointed out that no true friend of Caesar's would ever be soft on a man who had set himself up as a rival leader, Pilate gave in to the pressures brought upon him by those that would have Jesus crucified. To make it perfectly clear that he wanted no part in this dirty business, he said, I am innocent of this man's blood. And as a dramatic gesture, he stepped out in front of the crowd and went through a ritual hand washing in a basin of water he'd have them filled especially for that purpose. When we think of Pilate, we can't help thinking about that other famous hand washer, Lady Macbeth. Unlike Pilate, Lady Macbeth had committed murder, and what she kept trying to wash away in her sleep, long after her hands themselves were clean as a whistle, was her tormenting sense of guilt over the terrible thing she had done. She never succeeded, of course, but God is merciful, and one can hope that in the long run he did the job for her. Pilate's case is different and worse. For him, it was not so much the terrible thing he'd done as the thing he'd proven incapable of doing. He could have stuck to his guns and resisted the pressure and told the chief priests that they could go to hell. He could have spared Jesus' life, or he could have at least spared him the scourging and catcalls and appalling way that he died. Or, if that is still asking too much, he could have spoken some words of comfort when there was no one else in the world with either the chance or the courage to speak it. He could have shaken Jesus' hand. He could have said goodbye. But he didn't do it. And on that basis alone, you can almost believe the sad old legend is true, that again and again his body rises to the surface of a mountain lake and goes through the motion of washing its hands as he tries to cleanse himself, not of something he'd done for which God could forgive him, but for something he might have done but didn't, for which he could never forgive himself. A reading from John. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him."
A reading from Matthew. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him.
A reading from Matthew. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. And they compelled this man to carry his cross.
I was going into the city to celebrate the Passover, and he was being led out of the city as a Passover lamb. But we didn't understand that. When I got to Jerusalem, it wasn't what I expected. There was like 10 times more people there than the last time that I'd been there to celebrate Passover, and it just seemed like the whole city was angry, like just mobs of angry people. And all of a sudden this guard, the soldier, he grabs me, and I mean, he literally just pulls me out of the crowd, and he says, for me to carry this guy's cross. If this guy's blood gets on me, it stains me, and I can't celebrate the Passover. That's the whole reason I was there. It was hard to see the man through the blood. And then our eyes met. And I knew this man was not a liar. He was not a crazy man with grand ideas. He was the Messiah. I carried what I could, but he carried most of it. We began to walk. I heard the insults that they shouted at him and now at me. I felt the spit. I felt his blood on me. They'd taken a crown made of thorns, and then they smashed it on his head, and blood ran into his eyes. They laid him out on a cross, and they nailed his hands and his feet to it, and they lifted it up, and he had all of his weight on that one spike through his feet. And he would push up with all of his might and gasp for a breath to stay alive. And I couldn't watch it. He did that for hours. I couldn't watch it. And I looked down. I remember seeing my hands. My hands were stained with his blood, the blood that I thought would make me unclean. And I realized it's the blood that makes me clean. He breathed his last breath, and he died. And that was the day that I helped Jesus carry. That was the day that I helped Jesus carry my cross. He hung and died on my cross.
reading from Luke. A great number of the people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and your children. The days are surely coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Jesus doesn't need our pity. The pitiful Savior, whether intentionally or not, the way we depict the passion of Jesus, particularly the scene at the cross, elicits a mixture of guilt and pity. Ray Boltz wrote a popular song about the cross. Does he still feel the nails every time I fail? Does he hear the crowd cry, "Crucify again"? Am I causing him pain? Then I know I've got to change. I just can't bear the thought of hurting him. This encapsulates the way that many feel about the cross. It's a place where we need to pity Jesus. Look at his blood. Look at his tears. Look how lonely he is. He needs our help. If only I'd been there, I would have done something to help you, Jesus. Yes, Jesus deserves our pity and sympathy. The truth is that Jesus doesn't need our pity. We need his. The purpose of the Passion is not to make us feel sorry for Jesus, but to show us to what great lengths God goes to show compassion and pity for us. As Jesus hung on the cross, bloody, pierced, his chest heaving for breath, here is what he managed to wheeze out. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Even in his weakest moment, Jesus had pity on us. As he was being led to his execution, he turned to those following him and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." He had pity on the families living in Jerusalem because they understood so little about what his death would mean for them. Jesus does not need our sympathy or pity. When we look at the cross, this is what it demands: our commitment. There at the top of the cross, posted above Jesus' head in all four Passion accounts, is this sign: King of the Jews. When we look at the cross, we ought to tremble, not in sympathy or pity, but in fearful reverence. What sort of Savior is able to endure such a horrific death at the hands of his enemies and yet rise again? At the cross, God lifted up Jesus before the whole world, suspended between heaven and earth, as the only one powerful enough to defeat sin and death. Here is what Paul sees when he looks at the cross. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. The cross is a place of pity for us. The cross is the place where God shows mercy and compassion for us. The cross is the place where we are summoned to bow the knee before the God of death and life.
A reading from Luke. 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with Jesus. And they came to the place that is called the Skull. They crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself, if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise."
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss! The Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. My sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer. But this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my
A reading from John. And that is what the soldiers did. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home.
A reading from Matthew. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, This man is calling for Elijah. At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now, when the centurion and those with him, who were keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, Truly, this man was God's Son. The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone. The cross and the lynching tree interpret each other. Both were public spectacles, shameful events, instruments of punishment reserved for the most despised people in society. Any genuine theology and any genuine preaching of the Christian gospel must be measured against the test of the scandal of the cross and the lynching tree. Jesus did not die a gentle death like Socrates with his cup of hemlock. Rather, he died like a lynched black victim or a common black criminal in torment on the tree of shame. The crowd shout, "Crucify him," anticipated the white mob shout, "Lynch him." Jesus' agonizing final cry of abandonment from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" was similar to the lynched victim Sam Hose's awful scream as he drew his last breath, "Oh my God, oh Jesus." In each case, it was a cruel, agonizing, and contemptible death. The lynching tree, so strikingly similar to the cross on Golgotha, should have a prominent place in American images of Jesus' death, but it does not. In fact, the lynching tree has no place in American theological reflection about Jesus' cross in the proclamation of Christian churches about his passion. The conspicuous absence of the lynching tree in American theological discourse and preaching is profoundly revealing, especially since the crucifixion was clearly a first-century lynching. In the lynching era, from 1880 to 1940, white Christians lynched nearly 5,000 black men and women in a manner with obvious echoes of the Roman crucifixion of Jesus. Yet these Christians did not see the irony or contradiction in their actions. The cross can heal and hurt. It can be empowering and liberating, but also enslaving and oppressive. There is no one way in which the cross can be interpreted. I offer my reflections because I believe that the cross, placed alongside the lynching tree, can help us to see Jesus in America in a new light, and thereby empower people who claim to follow him to take a stand against white supremacy and every kind of injustice. The conspicuous absence of the lynching tree in American theological discourse and preaching is profoundly revealing especially since the crucifixion was clearly a first-century lynching. Unfortunately, during the course of 2,000 years of Christian history, the symbol of salvation has been detached from any reference to the ongoing suffering and oppression of human beings. Those whom Ignacio Ellacuría, the Salvadoran martyr, called the crucified peoples of history. The cross has been transformed into a harmless, non-offensive ornament that Christians wear around their necks. Rather than reminding us of the cost of discipleship, it has become a form of cheap grace, to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, an easy way to salvation that does not force us to confront the power of Christ's message and mission. Until we can see the cross and the lynching tree together, until we can identify Christ with a re-crucified black body hanging from a lynching tree, there can be no genuine understanding of Christian identity in America and no deliverance from the brutal legacy of slavery and white supremacy.
cross.